Israel's military called for more evacuations in southern Gaza as it widened its offensive.
Well, there are apparently what they're calling fierce battles in southern Gaza, specifically in the town of Khan Yunis, which was a Hamas stronghold for a long time.
Plus, China's military said Monday that a U.S. Navy ship illegally entered into waters in the South China Sea.
On Monday, China's military claimed the Gabrielle Giffords illegally entered waters adjacent to a disputed South China Sea atoll that has recently seen several maritime confrontations.
And Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky will address U.S. senators by video during a classified meeting Tuesday. Today is Tuesday, December 5th, and this is VOA's International Edition. Hello, I'm Rick Pantaleo. Israel's military called for more evacuations in southern Gaza as it widened its offensive aimed at eliminating the territory's Hamas rules. The war has already killed thousands of Palestinians and displaced over 3/4 of Gaza's 2.3 million residents who are running out of safe places to go. I spoke with VOA's Middle East correspondent, Linda Gradstein, who gives us this update.
Well, there are apparently what they're calling fierce battles in southern Gaza, specifically in the town of Khan Yunis, which was a Hamas stronghold for a long time. And the IDF chief of staff actually held an assessment inside the Gaza Strip, and the IDF spokesman says that Israel is going after all kinds of Hamas targets, and the fighting is being successful. There were 3 more Israeli soldiers killed in that fighting. So it's quite a difficult situation, remembering also that, Hamas still has about 137 hostages.
Linda, we all remember when the intense fighting was taking place in northern Gaza and the citizens there were told to flee to the south. Now that there are thousands of people from Gaza in the south, what are they supposed to do now?
Well, that's a good question, and that's one of the issues that the Secretary of State was here this weekend and was discussing with Israeli officials. Israel did publish a map in which it divided Gaza into all these different little sections and said that it would announce where it was fighting. The United States is pressuring Israel to do more to make sure that civilians aren't harmed. So far, we have reports of several hundred Palestinians killed in the last day or so, but Israel says they're doing everything they can to avoid civilian casualties. One idea is that Israel will make certain areas as special no-fire zones, that it won't fire on those areas. But the concern, of course, is that Hamas will also take advantage of that by trying to go into those areas.
A report from NBC News from a senior U.S. military official is saying that he was taken aback by the ferocity of Israel's renewed campaign as Washington increasingly calls on its ally to do more to protect civilians. Hostage families in Israel have also expressed fear for those who remain captive in Gaza now that the fighting is resumed.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's true. I think there is a sense in Israel that time is not infinite, that as the civilian casualties in Gaza mount, there will be increasing pressure on Israel to end its campaign. And they say that, if they stop now, basically they would just be leaving Hamas in power in Gaza. And it would be another year or 2 years, 5 years until this happened again. For the hostage families, it's just agonizing because they know that, every time Israel blows up a tunnel, which they've been doing repeatedly, a tunnel that was built by Hamas, used by Hamas, but that there could be hostages in there. And of course, they say they're doing everything they can to use intelligence information. The United States has helped with drone flights over Gaza to try to find the hostages. But if you're not having negotiations. I know that as, hostages were being released during the ceasefire last week, the families kept saying, oh, mine will be next, mine will be next. Now, I think Israel knew that for the men of military age, the price was going to be much higher than it had been until now. Until now, Israel had been releasing 3 Palestinian prisoners for every hostage released, but they never got to the point where they were really negotiating over a lot of these young men many of whom had been at that music festival when they were taken hostage.
That was VOA's Middle East correspondent, Linda Gradstein. China's military on Monday said a U.S. Navy ship illegally entered waters adjacent to the second Thomas Shoal, a disputed South China Sea atoll that had recently seen several maritime confrontations. Reuters' Zachary Goldman produced this report.
Man our ship and bring her to life.
The USS Gabrielle Giffords, seen here in Texas in 2017, is what the U.S. Navy calls an Independence-class littoral combat ship, which means it can operate closer to shorelines than other warships. And on Monday, China's military claimed the Gabrielle Giffords illegally entered waters adjacent to a disputed South China Sea atoll that has recently seen several maritime confrontations. A Chinese spokesperson said, quote, the U.S. seriously undermined regional peace and stability, adding that the U.S. disrupted the South China Sea and violated China's sovereignty. China is in disputes with several of its neighbors over its extensive claims of territorial waters in the South China Sea. The U.S. Navy said the USS Gabrielle Giffords was conducting routine operations in international waters in the South China Sea, consistent with international law. The Chinese military spokesperson said the U.S. ship was monitored and followed. The U.S. Navy responded, quote, we will not be deterred from continuing to work alongside our allies and partners in support of our shared vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific. In recent months, China has had several run-ins with Philippine vessels in the South China Sea. Over the weekend, the Philippine Coast Guard shared this video it says shows hundreds of Chinese maritime militia vessels gathering near a reef within Manila's exclusive economic zone. A Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson on Monday called the Chinese vessel's behavior, quote, responsible and lawful, and castigated the Philippines for what it said were, quote, irresponsible remarks.
Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky will address U.S. senators by video during a classified meeting Tuesday. The Biden administration invited Zelensky as it is sending Congress an urgent warning about the need to approve tens of billions of dollars in military and economic assistance to Ukraine, saying Kyiv's effort to defend itself from Russia's invasion may falter without it. Shalanda Young, director of the U.S. Office of Management and Budget, says the U.S. will run out of funding to send weapons and assistance to Ukraine by the end of 2023. House Speaker Mike Johnson says Republicans will insist on border policy changes as a part of a Ukrainian assistance bill. Talks hit a standstill but are expected to resume this week. The U.S. Justice Department says Manuel Rocha, a former American diplomat who served as a U.S. ambassador to Bolivia, has been charged with serving as a covert agent for Cuba's intelligence services since at least 1981. Associated Press Washington correspondent Sagar Magani reports.
The FBI arrested Manuel Rocha Friday. The Justice Department says he'd used various high-level positions, including on the National Security Council and as U.S. ambassador to Bolivia, to work with Cuban intelligence against the U.S.
This action exposes one of the highest-reaching and longest-lasting infiltrations of the U.S. government by a foreign agent.
Attorney General Merrick Garland says the FBI learned of Rocha's Cuban ties last year and arranged for someone posing as a Cuban spy to contact Rocha.
Rocha repeatedly referred to the United States as, quote, the enemy.
The Justice Department did not detail what information Rocha may have provided Havana while he was a diplomat. Sagar Magani at the White House.
Meanwhile, U.S. Department of State spokesman Matthew Miller says that the State Department is assessing the implications of the charges facing the former ambassador.
The only thing I'd say, again, an ongoing law enforcement matter here, where you've seen an indictment unsealed today. We commend the work of law enforcement in this matter, the Department of Justice, the FBI. the diplomatic security service here at the State Department in the actions they have taken so far in this case. And we will, in the coming days, weeks, months, work with our partners in the intelligence community to assess any long-term national security implications for this matter.
We're following these other stories from around the world. Envoys from the European Union's 27-member countries will meet on Tuesday to start debating whether to launch membership talks with Ukraine, something Hungary has threatened to block and others to saddle with more conditions. Indonesian authorities have halted the search for 12 climbers after the Mount Merapi volcano erupted again, unleashing a new burst of hot ash as high as 800 meters into the air. The head of West Sumatra's Search and Rescue Agency said the bodies of 11 climbers were recovered earlier Monday, but renewed volcanic activities hindered attempts to relocate them. A team of scientists reported that the world this year pumped 1.1% more heat-trapping carbon dioxide into the air than last year because of increased pollution from China and India. At the COP28 international climate talks, which are underway, global officials are trying to cut emissions by 43% by 2030. Alana Sargsyan, an ethnic Armenian, is a refugee for the third time in her life. After fleeing twice before, she had to move once again in September after the Azerbaijani offensive Nagorno-Karabakh, an autonomous primarily Armenian Christian territory within the mostly Muslim former Soviet Republic of Azerbaijan. Olivia Chan of Reuters has more.
For the third time in her life, ethnic Armenian Elida Sargsyan is a refugee. She was born in the Azerbaijani capital Baku. The city's once large Armenian minority were driven out in violence, triggered by the outbreak of ethnic conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, an autonomous, primarily Christian territory within the mostly Muslim, then Soviet Republic of Azerbaijan. Having moved twice before, she is now sheltering in Armenia's Masis, close to the border with Turkey. Since September, it has hosted around 8,000 refugees from Karabakh.
Not that I was calm. I'm a refugee for the third time. I have got used to it somehow, but it is very difficult for the people who have left their homes for the first time. Now they are crying, but they will overcome this as we did. But the situation is in a deadlock. It feels like the heart is about to burst, and that is all.
Просто уже безвыходное положение. Вот как будто вот сердце хочет лопнуть и все.
Sargsyan and her family fled to Soviet Armenia in 1988, then set up home in Nagorno-Karabakh, despite the fact that the mountain region was in Azerbaijan and at war with the government in Baku. In 2020, they lost another home when Azerbaijan, by now closely allied with Armenians' Betanua Turkey, reconquered much of Karabakh in a second war. And in September 2023, after Azerbaijan retook the remainder of Karabakh in a lightning offensive, Sargsyan, by now 54, fled her home for a third time. She was one of the territory's 120,000 ethnic Armenians who suffered a 9-month Azerbaijani blockade of vital supplies from Armenia and refused to believe Baku's insistence that her rights would be preserved as a citizen of Azerbaijan. Many of the ethnic Armenians from Nagorno-Karabakh hurriedly abandoned homes and farms when Azerbaijan began its final assault on September 19th, and they have nothing. Alina Harutyyan fled with dozens of others in the back of an industrial truck. Now she, her husband and 4 children share one room on the ground floor of a derelict library. Armenia's government has provided them with 2 beds and a one-off $250 payment, but their lodgings have no utilities and are furnished only with child-sized tables and chairs. Like many refugees, the family has struggled to find work in Armenia, dependent instead on the kindness of locals.
We would very much like to go back because it's our homeland, our birthplace. But to this day, we live in fear. We had a chance before when we were protected by our men in their positions. But if they take us and we are told we should live with Turks, then of course not.
That was Reuters' Olivia Chan. A second winter in wartime has arrived in Ukraine, and the country is working to make sure this one is not as difficult as last year's, when Russian shelling caused severe damage to the power grid and heat delivery systems. Anna Chernikova reports from Kyiv.
In 2022, Ukraine endured heavy damage to its energy infrastructure due to intense Russian shelling. Officials say about 50% of the energy infrastructure was hit, leaving millions of Ukrainians without heat and power for parts of the winter. Alexander Harchenko, director of Ukraine's Energy Industry Research Center, expects Russian forces to increase their attacks on the power grid and other targets again this year, as temperatures plunge.
I think they are waiting good for them time, and they believe that this good time is cold weather, and they are waiting a real cold weather to start this attack again.
Harchenko says Ukraine has drawn lessons from last winter.
We survived, and we spent this time in between these 7-8 months to restore our system with very deep focus on physical defense, air defense, restoration of service capabilities of the system for the people.
Petro Kotin, the president of Energoatom, Ukraine's largest power producer, says this winter the country is ready to generate and distribute power at full capacity despite Russian rocket attacks.
All 9 units we expect to be on grid, and we increase the protection of these units, physical protection.
Due to wartime security restrictions, officials are unable to disclose details of those protection measures. Kotin told VOA that while fighting this winter's challenges, Ukraine has also begun to implement a long-term energy security strategy. The country wants complete independence from Russian nuclear fuel, used for its Soviet-era VVER 440 reactors. In September, fuel supplied by the US-based Westinghouse Electric Company was loaded onto one of the reactors for the first time. The plan is for it to replace Russian fuel completely in the near future.
And 440, it's like 16 reactors throughout Europe, and all of them are operated on the Russian fuel. And we started this process just to load Westinghouse fuel to these small reactors with 440.
While Ukraine aims to achieve full energy independence from Russia, its main concern now is to survive another winter as the Russian shelling of critical infrastructure intensifies. Anna Chernikova, VOA News, Kyiv.
America's oldest public park was established in Massachusetts in 1634. Boston Common has seen a lot in its 389-year history and remains as central to city life as it was at its founding centuries ago. VOA's Dora McQuarr reports from Boston.
Nestled in the center of a prominent American city is the country's first public park. Boston Common was established in 1634 and, centuries later, still remains at the center of civic life. Liz Vizza is president of Friends of the Public Garden, a group that cares and advocates for Boston Common.
America's oldest park. It is a place where we come to celebrate, we come to protest, we come to find a place alone, we come to enjoy festivals and events free. Shakespeare occurs here every summer.
Colonists chipped in via a household tax to buy the 50-acre property for public use.
They didn't have backyards. This was their front yard and backyard and common ground. It was a place that everybody owned.
In this space, cows grazed, the military trained, British soldiers camped out, and convicted criminals were hanged. Presidents George Washington and John Adams spent time here. Cows were banned from the Common in 1830. Dogs are the only domesticated animals you'll find here now. Boston resident Jim Brinning says he's witnessed many protests here over the decades.
I think it's part of Boston's identity. In many ways, it epitomizes the opportunities in this country. We can disagree, but we use public space.
Today, children play in a wading pool when it's hot, and there's ice skating in winter. The Common is a crossroads. Up to 40,000 people come through the park daily, averaging out to about 7 million people a year. For many, Boston Common is a calming gathering place brimming with history and art.
I think it's a huge part of the city. I feel like it's an integral part where everyone can just come and relax and enjoy the city together.
My favorite part, actually, it's the embrace. I love the embrace.
The sculpture of civil rights leader Martin Luther King embracing his wife is one of several significant pieces in the park. The Brewer Fountain was the park's first public piece of art. A sculpture honoring the first all-volunteer black regiment in the Union Army is considered among the finest pieces of American art. Some monuments here will eventually be reconsidered and updated. Again, Liz Vizza for Friends of the Public Garden.
We are trying to say this is not just a white story and not just a male story, because memorial landscapes tend to be statues of men.
And there's a deeper story regarding this land, which was once home to the indigenous Massachusetts tribe.
People have lived on this land for 12,000 years. But what's even a more fascinating story is to peel those layers open, to think about the Native American living here.
Viz's team is working with tribal members to develop a suitable tribute to the Common's first caretakers. They hope to have it rolling by 2026, when America celebrates its 250th birthday. Dora McQuarr, VOA News, Boston, Massachusetts.
This has been International Edition on The Voice of America. On behalf of everyone at VOA, thank you for joining us. For pictures, stories, videos, and more, follow VOA News on your favorite social media platform and online at voanews.com. Until next time, I'm Rick Pantaleo.
Next, an editorial reflecting the views of the United States government.
Thanks to recent humanitarian pauses in the fighting in Gaza, orchestrated by the United States, Israel, Qatar, and Egypt, hostages in Gaza have been freed and are returning home to their families, and humanitarian assistance is getting to the people of Gaza, noted Secretary of State Antony Blinken on a recent stop in Israel. He expressed hope that these pauses could be extended in order to get more hostages out of Gaza and more assistance in.
We share the elation, the relief of the families from more than a dozen countries, including the United States, who've been reunited with their loved ones. And yet, there are scores of family here in Israel, the United States, and around the world whose loved ones continue to be held captive and who are desperate to get them home safely. We will not stop working until we get every hostage back home with their families and loved ones.
At the same time, we continue to surge humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians in Gaza, said Secretary Blinken. Together with the UN, our partners in the region, we have significantly increased the flow of food, water, medicine, fuel to power desalination plants, hospitals, and other critical infrastructure. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also made clear that Israel intends to resume its military operations against Hamas when Hamas stops releasing hostages, said Secretary Blinken.
Israel has the right to do everything it can to ensure that the slaughter Hamas carried out on October 7th can never be repeated. Hamas cannot remain in control of Gaza. It cannot retain the capacity to repeat that carnage.
At the same time, Secretary Blinken urged Israel to take more steps to protect the lives of civilians, avoid further displacement of civilians inside of Gaza, and give civilians who've been displaced to southern Gaza the choice to return to the north as soon as conditions permit. Secretary Blinken said everyone around the world who cares about protecting innocent civilians, innocent lives, should be calling on Hamas, indeed demanding of Hamas, that it immediately stop its murderous acts of terror and deplorable use of innocent men, women, and children as human shields. breaking the cycle of violence and conflict, ensuring Israel's security demands, improving the lives of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank is the only way to bring about a just and lasting peace.
That was an editorial reflecting the views of the United States government.